Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning in to B-Link Innovation's next innovation event, Resilience and Innovation in New Zealand Agriculture. My name is Julia Henson, Communications and Events Manager at B-Link He Puna Kari Kari. I'll be your host this morning. So we're B-Link Innovation, a part of Lincoln University. We specialise in the facilitation of innovative ideas, not only in the Canterbury region, but around New Zealand. One of our main points of difference is a far-reaching audience and a collaborative nature to ensure that New Zealand has the best possible outcomes in terms of environmental sustainability and native efficiencies. So just onto a little bit of housekeeping before we get started on this morning's event. So the webinar will be recorded and sent out to you after the event. This means that you can spend time listening rather than trying to take heaps of notes. So it should be sent out in the next 72 hours, so keep an eye on your mailbox for that one. There'll be a Q&A session following our speaker, the Honourable Damian O'Connor, so please use our Q&A button at the bottom of your screen rather than the live chat function, so I can then pose those questions on your behalf. There is also a thumbs up button next to each question. The more each question is upvoted, the more the question will be prioritised. So if you like a specific question, make sure you click the thumbs up button. And as a default, all participants are muted and all webcams are switched off. We're all about being social here at B-Link Innovation, so if you hear anything that you'd like to share on social, please don't forget to mention us with our handles as on the screen at the moment. We want to make sure our events and the ideas that come out of them are as far-reaching as possible, so please get social. Now, New Zealand, along with the rest of the world, has faced unprecedented times in the last couple of months, and I think that goes without saying. We have seen New Zealand primary industries re-adopt our world-renowned number 8 wire mentality and continuing to show other industries in New Zealand and around the world that we remain agile and ready to adapt to a new way of working. We have seen bull prices remain healthy with reference to a second full week of bull sales a couple of weeks ago in Taumaranui. And we've also seen the adoption of animal tracing has improved after changes to strengthen the NAIT scheme. And we've seen fees-free schemes adopted by the likes of Lincoln University to upskill and reskill in order to fill the shortage of food and fibre qualified professionals in order to meet the post-COVID needs of the New Zealand economy. But surely it's not all that rosy. In this virtual event, we're really lucky to have the Honourable Damian O'Connor, Minister of Agriculture, speaking with regards to his take on lockdown measures and their impact on outputs, exports and innovation, and how going forward we can continue to nurture innovation in New Zealand primary industries. So with all that being said, please let me introduce you to Minister O'Connor. So Minister O'Connor is the current Minister of Agriculture, Rural Communities, Biosecurity and Food Safety, and is also the Minister of State for Trade and Export Growth. Minister O'Connor hails from the West Coast but bred locally in Canterbury as a student of St Bede's College, Christchurch, and is an alumni of Lincoln University. He was first elected to Parliament in 1993 election. A veteran of New Zealand politics, Minister O'Connor was appointed his current ministerial titles following the 2017 election, which meant him having to manage the 2017 Mycoplasma bovis outbreak. The Minister's background in farming and adventure tourism drives his view that we all need well-paid sustainable jobs and industry growth to improve our future. He's a passionate advocate for rural communities and a thriving agricultural sector. And aside from his political career, Minister O'Connor has won the West Coast Young Farmer of the Year award and enjoys sports including skiing, whitewater rafting, jet boating, motorsports, and most importantly, playing rugby for the New Zealand parliamentary team. It's my great pleasure to introduce you all to the Honourable Damian O'Connor. Over to you, Minister O'Connor.
Kia ora, Julia. I hope you can see me here. I've just been having a little bit of trouble getting into it. So, look, thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words. And I'm probably not going to speak for too long because I'd rather open it up for questions. The resilience topic that we're talking about today is of course interest to us all. One of the questions was, how were we doing pre-COVID? And I'd have to say, in general terms, things were tracking along quite well. Aside from the drought, of course, and the climatic conditions that we face, and we're going to face for, I guess, forever now, that is disruption. And whether you believe in climate change or not, the weather patterns mean that we are going to have to be prepared for changes, and we will not be able to farm in the way that we did for the last 10 years using the same patterns of stock movement. We are going to have to make some adjustments. It might be the crops that we're growing. Indeed, in my patch at the top of the West Coast Tasman electorate, we see trials to grow hops up in what are kind of high country farming areas. Such are the opportunities, but also the, I guess, the threats to our agricultural systems. African swine fever, of course, has provided an opportunity for meat and protein into China in particular, but that has, I guess, their demand to replace the 200 million or thereabouts, is probably more now, pigs killed, means that our meat prices were pretty solid. Dairy was okay, looking at a bit of a drop, but in fact, the recent GDT crisis have reversed that trend. So we were doing okay when it came to most of our exports. Horticulture going gangbusters. I attribute that in much part to the fact that they are connected to their consumers in almost all of the things that they export. They're in tune with what they are seeking. They produce a high quality product ready for consumer on the orchards and other growing environments, whether it be vegetables or whatever, not much of that, but some going offshore. They have to be high quality, they have to be ready for consumer, and they've done really well, and we could learn something from them. We, of course, coming into government, said that we're going to have to look at some of the issues around the environment. We have had an impact on waterways in some areas, particularly where there's been intensive dairying. Most people acknowledge that, but how we address that has been always a challenge. We've laid out now some clear guidelines, and we think a program of support that will enable us to shift us back over a generation to have high quality water throughout all of New Zealand. Really important. Animal welfare standards are really important for Europeans and many of our trading partners. And we've seen images and incidents where it's not been best practice, and those images go around the world, so we've got to do our best to prevent that. So the intensive winter grazing task force that I appointed was one of a number of programs, I guess, I've had to try and get ahead of the curve and ensure that our reputation for being good farmers in the world can be the best farmers for the world, that we lead by example. I guess the M. bovis challenge that was thrown at me when we first came in is one that my colleagues supported. We committed over $800 million. We then said we'd sit down with the sectors and work on a cost-sharing arrangement. We're still working through that, although the sectors are committed to do that and to front up with some of the money, that is the farmers. And we are making progress at this point. 10 infected farms. We're still, of course, inspecting other farms as to the possible incidents of M. bovis, but if we can get ahead of this and eradicate it, it will mean that we can run more intensive farming systems. That's not more than now, but if that we can run some pretty efficient farming systems, not in fact have to step right back to a situation that may have been more than challenging if we were to farm in the presence of M. bovis. Offshore they do, but they have systems that really care for the cows, don't put them under as much stress, or accept the high level of mortality and disease that we simply couldn't accept here. So eradicating M. bovis is at the heart of, I think, good animal welfare and farm management, livestock management process into the future. Look, I won't say any more than that, other than I think we've got an incredible future ahead of us. We are a country that at this point has got ahead of COVID-19. We've got a profile on the international stage that acknowledges us for that. If we can get rid of M. bovis, that will be one more, I guess, feather in our cap, and we can say that we care for our animals, we care for our people, we care for our environment, and that what we produce for you is of the safest, highest quality nutrition. The wool report released last week is another, I guess, step in the process to say that natural fibres are full of potential, with incredible innovation. If we make an effort, can lead the way into a lower carbon, better for the world environment and farming systems. So I'll leave it at that, and then happy to answer any of the questions. And I think we are really well placed to take advantage of the huge opportunities to feed the world that wants safe food, wants natural fibres, and you know, wants to be inspired. And I think our Prime Minister's done that. We're doing that as farmers, and we can continue to do that. Kia ora.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Minister. I know we've got a few questions that have come through already. So if you've got any questions, pressing questions for the Minister, please pop it in our Q&A section here. So a very informative and interesting piece there, with some incredibly challenging times around the world, as we all know only too well. So I guess we've just got to keep hoping that the curve continues on a positive trajectory in the coming months, and time is just going to be a test of that. So just a couple of things from me before we get into the Q&As. There's been a significant investment into reskilling people to get into primary industries, to fill the gap, I guess, of the migrant workers. But this is a medium to long-term resource fill. So what do you expect to happen in the immediate future in order to fill that gap while we've still got the close of the borders?
Look, we have fronted up with literally millions of dollars to help the primary sectors to retrain people. We clearly have in tourism and hospitality some real pressure, and some of those jobs have simply disappeared. And so shifting people across into primary sectors is what we want to do. Many of those people, and we've seen down out of Queenstown, people who drive jet boats, people who, in fact, helicopter pilot friend of mine is at Telford, people who take skills that are just intuitive and will fit well with the primary sectors, whatever it is, forestry or you know, agriculture, or just working with livestock or whatever, or a mix of all. We can get them across. Some of them are surprised that the incomes they're getting better than they had. So we'll put money into retraining, redeployment, and we'll continue to do that. And there are, of course, quite a few migrant workers or people on temporary work permits in New Zealand who can't get home. Some of them are unable to, particularly at the Pacific Islands. So we are adjusting their permits so that they can shift across into other industries and be more flexible with those permits. So, but the opportunity for migrant workers to come back into the country will be really, really limited for quite some time. We're looking at the areas of farm managers where there is high skills. We've allowed them, our technicians and people who can or are crucial to either you know, huge job opportunities, which is the film industry argument, but then some food technologists and technicians for frontier plants or for developments that have taken place at the moment. And then you come back to farm managers where clearly you know, they have some skills there. And so we're currently looking at that, but you know, for people just working on farms who are not New Zealand residents, it's going to be very hard for them to get back in. So yeah, a challenge ahead of us, but as quickly as we can, we're retraining, redeploying people.
Yep, brilliant. And I think you can see the investment definitely is there when you're looking at the likes of stimulating the economy through an improved tertiary education offering. So I think that's definitely evident in terms of that. Now you talked about an innovation piece about the we care situation. We care about what we're exporting. We're caring about the food we're actually putting into our bodies, and we're caring about animal welfare. Potentially a little bit controversial and maybe a bit topical, but wondering, how does that fit into the regenerative farming piece that's happening at the moment, do you think?
Well, I think it's all, you know, whatever you call it, I think the word regenerative has come out of the States, and I guess it's been pulled into New Zealand. We had biological, we've had, you know, had organic. We've kind of taken those terms from outside our country often, and we've just said, tried to adapt them. Look, the regenerative one is, I think, we should define for ourselves. If you look at some of the videos out of the US, espousing the great virtues of regenerative farming, most of us would think, well, that just sounds like rotational pastoral grazing and normal kind of New Zealand farm practice. And it is very closely aligned. But, I think we should define our own regenerative farming. And we're more aware now of water quality. We're more aware of soil quality, or some people are. And I think that's where this area of farming looks to develop further, on the basis that if you've got better nutrition in the soils, better management of the soils, that comes through into the pasture, then into the protein, and ultimately into the product that you supply people to eat and consume. And there's some logic to that. And so I think we have to look at all of those opportunities. And we've got, in the US market in particular, and it has been for some time, a focus on pasture-fed protein. And so there's a premium being paid for that. We should have picked up on those indicators some years ago. We've got Beef and Lamb looking to develop Taste Pure Nature as a marketing campaign that says, look, we've got pasture-based protein here, consume it, it's better for you, and you should pay a little bit more for it. Now, if we follow that through into regenerative, where there are huge premiums being paid in the marketplace in the US for what they have titled and branded regenerative milk, meat, and all the other consumables that, particularly in some areas of the East Coast. So regenerative has a brand value. We just have to define what that will be for us, and that's one of the things that we are prepared to support. And the title of Te Taiao, which is well-being in Māori, is one launched last week again with Fit for a Better World. I think it rounds everything up into a story that says New Zealand will produce food and fibre with the values of Te Taiao in a way that is New Zealand kind of regenerative. That is, we look after our soil, we look after our communities, we look after animals. And we think that if you buy a product from New Zealand, you'll be buying something that helps the world. And that's a credible story that can have huge brand value.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's being the country that we are, you're absolutely right when you're talking about creating our own regenerative farming model and ensuring that then fits with our own story and how we market that from our own side, and whether or not there is value in doing that going forward, or if that's what consumers are demanding. So we've got a few Q&As here from the audience. So I'll pop those to you. We've got Charles N. Murfield has said, do you see a need to better link our agricultural scientists and the science system with on-the-ground farming?
Absolutely, and look, we've got a review of the CRI process. That report is just out for consultation now. I think anyone would say that there's a lot of disconnection across our CRIs, across the process of science and research, and we have to give more certainty to the scientists, but we have to give them more focus too. And I guess the Primary Sector Council task was to actually give us a vision, so that whatever we're doing in connection with the primary sectors is linked, and we can answer the question why we're doing this. And so, short answer, yes, absolutely, there is a disconnect. We have to improve that.
Great. And another question here from Alan Renwick. Our spending on R&D as a percentage of GDP is around half of the OECD average. Can we really achieve fit for future ambitions without much higher R&D investment, both from government and industry?
It's going to be very hard. I have to say the primary sectors or some parts of it have been a lot better at investing back in through levies, back into R&D. There are some parts of our economy that are just useless and have done none of that. And so where's the government have committed to and have put more money into R&D, but again, I think it needs to be better coordinated. So we have to lift the percentage. We've lifted that as a target, but we won't be able to do it overnight. In fact, we don't have the capability to spend that money wisely in a coordinated way, and that's what we've got to do. get our structures right to make sure when we boost the funding, then it's really going to give us the outcomes.
We've got another question here. What is your expectation for the growing interest in regenerative agriculture, topical, I guess, with what we just talked about, and the concern that there is not enough science to support its claimed benefits?
And there's some truth in that. I think we have to develop our own science. That is, we've got to set up, and there are many people across the country and some organisations that are wanting to lay down some of these trials and investigate what is intuitive, but not necessarily backed with stats. But then there's a view that, well, if we're kind of looking to prove every single component of it before we advocate for it, we'll be stuck in the mud. So, I talked to a number of people. I said, just give it a go. Don't convert your whole farm. Just have a trial. Plant one paddock in 40 different species of plants and see how that goes. Graze it in a different way before you convert your whole farm. And so, look, there are a number of ways that we can move forward on this. There are a number of different technologies that enable us to monitor it. But we do need scientists alongside us reassuring us that the direction in which we're heading is the right one.
And I guess that that research can't be really undertaken until it is people start doing it as well, and in different parts of the country. So it's one of those sort of catch-22 for a lot of people there. We've got.
Yes, I think that, look, intuitively, people just want to get on and do it. I mean, a lot of smart people out there who have knowledge of systems and they just want to try something different. So the scientists getting alongside them rather than dictating to them is probably the best way forward.
Mm-hmm. Great, we've got a question here from Charlotte Sullivan. Morena, everyone. I'm really interested in hearing Minister O'Connor's views on creating a more balanced animal plant agri-industry and how the government is planning to further support the development of plant protein industries all through the value chain.
Look, it's a very comprehensive question and statement, that one. We want to promote the best land use, and that will, it's open to all kinds of plants. Indeed, hemp is one of the more recent opportunities up my way. As I said, we've had what was sheep country into dairy, now going into hops. And I think that's been, I guess, the hallmark of New Zealand agriculture. Farmers get out and change land use where they see a better future. That better future has to ensure that we have good environmental practice, good animal welfare practice. And as I say, with a new level of awareness of what we do to the land and on the land, any change must be a sustainable one. So the regenerative principle of just looking after the soil, looking after the animals, and whether that be production of plants or animals themselves, conversion to, we're not saying what is better, but we are saying that there are huge opportunities for a country that runs on the values of Te Taia, well-being for all components of our world, and whether we're exporting horticulture through plant production, or good food or animals, the world's our oyster.
I guess also with the agility that the New Zealand market sort of shows, I think that further comes into the world as our oyster sort of statement there.
We're not locked into subsidies. If you have a look at what is happening in Europe, they've just released a farm to fork strategy. $100 billion of money they're committed to this, to try and shift across to more organic production, keep animal welfare standards really high. But they're doing that through subsidies and I guess incentives. We have a farming system that's free of that, and some might at times think it's hard commercially, but it does allow us to be very adaptable. And I'm sure as those opportunities open up across the world, that we'll take them up very, very quickly.
Great. We've got a question here from Daryl Stretton. Where are you at with respect to initiating the GMO conversation at central government level? Is this technology required for the purpose of integrated viable future? I guess this one's probably not directly an innovation piece, but around, I guess, the agility and going forward with the legalities of GMO as well. So interesting to hear your answer to this one.
Look, and I had a conversation last week with a company that is very reliant on non-GMO and the value that it adds to its brand. And clearly with Australia, we're linked to Australia with our food standards, and with some of our conversations around food production. And, you know, they're looking to be a bit more flexible. There's talk of trying to bring in gene technology. And of course that's, that allows, you know, some of the gene editing, not that complete GMO transformation that we've talked about in the past. So we have to keep up with GMO technology and GM technology. There's no doubt about that. Whether we should use it in our supply chain is a complex question. I've said that we need to have that conversation. It needs to be a mature one. And I ask people, I've asked, you know, people selling our products in the UK and Europe, you know, does being non-GMO give us an advantage? And they say, hell yes, it does. They don't want the complexity of them trying to sell a GM product or product that has GM in it. It may be less so over time. Indications are that new millennials are less concerned about GM in their food or GMOs. But I think we need to be really careful because once we, you know, utilize GMO technology in our production systems, then there's no going back. And I think the advantage that we have at this point is non-GMO. Can we sustain that? Can we run profitable farming systems and food production systems without it? Not sure, but we need to have that ongoing conversation. It's not been, you know, a big one at this point. But the likes of James Shaw, the Greens, who have been kind of opposed, they understand that GM technology is very much part of the future for different things. But we as producers of food and nutrition have to be clearly able to answer if the technology at the production end is worth it when we're in fact selling into the consumer markets where they have a perception about it.
So I've got a question here from Don Hammond, which I'll read out to you in a second, but I think sort of ties into a question that I have, that whether or not, in light of what has been happening over the last few months, is there an opportunity for wool? So his question is, you mentioned the incredible product that wool is, but we continue to see declining value and as a result, declining volume. Strong wool now is worth less than the cost of shearing, so shearing becomes an animal health cost rather than the harvest cost. And is there a chance now or a plan to turn this around? And I think, is this the opportunity, or is now the time to be able to turn this around as well?
I say yes. The problem with the wool sector has been many, many layers, and the only people really who have been really focused on getting more for the wool at farm level have been the farmers. Everyone else has wanted, I guess, the lowest cost input into a system that either where players clip the ticket or that they want lowest cost. If you're producing carpet, you actually want wool at a low cost. If you're producing jumpers or anything, you want the lowest cost input. Now, the reality is now that the industry shouldn't exist because the actual, you know, the cost of the raw material is unsustainable. And the only reason that farmers are actually shearing at the moment is for animal welfare purposes, actually. That's a crazy situation. So we released the wool report, and what it says is it's not the solution by any means. What it says is that actually we have to go out in the market and understand what is the potential. And you would have thought this should have been done, and indeed it should have. I asked the industry, I could have told you that, possibly, but for the minister to write a report and say this is what should happen, probably wouldn't have generated, I guess, the momentum. This has been written by people across the sector, and they say we've got to go out into market and really understand the potential for it. We've got to get some structure around that and get a bit of resource to bring some coordination. That's indeed what we will support from government. Look, by every measure, wool should be the perfect fibre. It's biodegradable, it's renewable, you know, it's adaptable, and with a bit of research and R&D and investment, I'm sure it can be, you know, utilised in many, many ways. Ron's is doing some good work. We could soften the fibre for strong wool. Who knows what we can do with it? But for it to be, I guess, to be almost irrelevant in the world of fibre now is unbelievable when we're competing against oil and the world's going off oil. So from every perspective, wool has an incredible future. It's up to us to get organised and to invest in that future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whether or not we see a change when it comes to wool, and I guess we're talking about conventional wool practice there, but then I've been speaking to some harvesters of goat fibre the other day, and whether or not there's an innovative place for that as well. Which sort of leads us in nicely to our next question. So the sector has been incredibly innovative during this incredibly challenging time, and COVID has pushed the farmer and the grower yet again, and we have seen primary industries again holding up the New Zealand economy, and I think we're looking to them to really guide us into the future. And have you seen any innovative inventions or innovative solutions that were developed during COVID or in light of COVID that you think will help shape the future?
Look, firstly, go to the marketplace, because that's crucial. And so, talking with some of the food producers, I know the meat companies and some of the seafood companies, they simply changed the size of the packs that they were selling into market from 10 kilograms down to 3. Why? Because the family might buy 3, but it might be the restaurant that buys 10. The way that people are consuming food has changed internationally, and we have to be ready for that change. And I think, the cuts of meat, the online access to food that we've seen may have suited some companies and not others. And so we've got to, right back at the farm level, make sure that, we're producing the animals with the right qualities, so that the meat companies, for example, can cut them into the kind of consumer-ready cuts that give us a convenient and high return income. And so there are many things happening. In terms of innovation, I know that the processing companies also adapted the way that they're just breaking down the animals. I know that, in the pack houses, people work differently, but got through the harvest, with bigger spacings. Many areas. I think on farm, we just got on and did what we did well. We probably had less access to, some of the people, maybe the social support, maybe the advice. But as always, farmers will innovate if they get the right signals. The processing companies and the marketers and I guess the retailers, they were the ones who had to adapt. And I hope that we see more direct to consumer focus, and that people on farm realise that, just as orchardists do, they realise that what they're delivering to whoever buys has to be something desirable by consumers in the world.
I think absolutely right. We've sort of looked at what's happened over the last few months as just New Zealanders getting on with it in a lot of respects, and that is a direct reflection on New Zealand work ethic. I think when you're resource poor like that. But I think in light of that as well, there needs to be, I know that there's been a great focus on this of late, but mental health in primary industries, where people are working a lot longer hours than what they would normally, or working within their respective bubbles. I think there needs to be a greater focus on what are we doing to help support them as well from an outside point of view.
One of the things that COVID has done is maybe, or should have, is shift the focus back to people. Firstly, it's really important that if we are healthy, if our after the health of people, then we'll have a good country. And if you look to our industry, we've perhaps taken for granted people. I know we say we admire the innovation, the work ethic, and all of that, as you said. But sometimes we don't reward it as it should be. And I've worked offshore, as many of us have. And Kiwis are known to be some of the best workers and most innovative thinkers in the world. So why can't we get them into our most noble industry? That's production of food. It's in part because there hasn't been enough incentive. And so there's perhaps less opportunity or less aspiration to buy a farm by a young Kiwi now. They see the hurdles in front of them. It still can be done. So without that kind of motivation, what is it that will bring people into our sectors? And ultimately, it's a good, secure career, and many now should see that actually the production of food and that is pretty secure, even in a COVID world. But it is enough money to, I guess, have a decent life, to be able to look after your family, and you know, sometimes the cost of living in rural New Zealand are more. And so we actually have to put more money and more support into people who want to come into our sectors. And what we've done is put a huge amount of money and investment into the land value, and perhaps insufficient into the resources of the people. And I think that will have to shift. And then we will attract more Kiwis in there. We'll have, I guess, less reliance on the migrant labour, which is always risky when it comes to things like pandemics or international travel disruptions. So relying on Kiwis to do as much as possible through our high quality, high value food chain is a good way forward. And so I struggle to understand why we should be getting, or we should be challenged to get people working in kiwi fruit when we're paying $400,000 a hectare just for a license. That's before you invest. So, you know, maybe we've just got to make sure there's enough incentive for people to come and pick, and it will be seasonal work. But these are the kind of just the adjustments. We won't transform things overnight, but we have to make the adjustments to get the right incentives in the right place and to get the right investment in the right areas, and that does include people.
Absolutely. So we've got a question here from Peter Russell, I think, which flows on quite nicely from that. So he says here, today you're talking about innovators and thinkers within the agri space. And he says, I'm sure a number here have got some very good ideas or systems or products for improving our future. So what process is there in order to present those ideas and get them moving?
There was PGP, there was a number, there have been the Sustainable Farming Fund. There have been a number of, I guess, funds available from government over the years for innovation, joint ventures to I guess progress things like good ideas. I changed that. We've revamped to SFFF, so Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures, and it's very much focused on innovation. I do not want to fund, or I don't want the taxpayer to fund business as usual operations. They must be at the front end, because there are Kiwis out there with great ideas. They do have trouble getting access to some capital at times, or just taking the next step. That money, and we brought another $100 million into that fund. We brought all that money forward to ensure that if there are good ideas, then there will be money available to progress them. So you can go online and get access to that. You know, if people say they haven't been able to get access or success through SFFF, then we'll make the adjustments necessary. But you need a good business case. You need to not guaranteed that this is going to be flying, but worth progressing to help the very people who asked the question. Yeah, we've got to go for it. We've seen if you go to places like Tatua, if you go to places like Sydney, you go around the place. There's innovative companies in the meat sector as well, and in the horticulture. Lots of good things happening. If they need the money to grow, then we should find it somewhere.
Absolutely. And we've got a question here from Beck Parry, who I think again flows on that quite nicely. COVID shone a light on a broken food system with direct implications on public health outcomes. Are there any plans to more cohesively align the works or plans of agri and hort production and supply with the works of the Ministry of Health? And when currently food isn't considered by a single ministry yet, plays a vital role in both New Zealand export dollars and also New Zealanders' public health rights and outcomes?
Look, very good question, and there are many discussions saying we should have the Ministry of Food and Fibre, and indeed we might get there, next government. But if we get back in, it's one of the discussions we should have to take us forward. The Ministry of Health or health professionals, and this, at the risk of getting criticised, have been really useless at focusing on nutrition. They often focus on fixing people up, not preventing them getting unwell. And so we have to provide some assistance for them. They are so busy fixing people up often that they don't get the time at the front end. But we're seeing a shift back to that, I guess, and we have to be conscious of things like sugar, for example. We've got alcohol, we've got a whole lot of other drugs that can affect, I guess, the well-being of Kiwis. We've got to be sensible and honest about those discussions. And I think the world has moved. COVID has brought a focus to our well-being and general health, and that does provide an opportunity for us to get ahead. But one of the things that KPMG has said for a couple of years now in its agribusiness report, and there's more focus on, it's called food security often, but the fact that too many Kiwis can't get access to quality food in their day-to-day lives. And that is terrible for a country that claims to produce the healthiest, safest food for the 40 to 50 million people who we export to. So we have a reputational risk here that unless we ensure that, you know, obesity levels are reduced, that people have access to good nutrition on a daily basis, will be exposed as we market offshore. So there's some great initiatives from farmers and people in agribusiness about to provide good food to people, not just through food banks, but actually trying to get a better system in place. And it's indeed a focus of both the Fit for a Better World and indeed our post-COVID initiatives. And I was just reading a report last night on that, said that, you know, we've still got a large uptake in some of the food banks. We are for providing food parcels for people, a mixture of good, healthy food. And I think that the food producing sectors should get together and ensure that, some might say subsidise or give or whatever, I don't care. It just ensure that there is a delivery system that enables those people to be able to afford that food. The duopoly that we have in the supermarkets does not help, in my view, and we often ignore that reality. So it's a bit more competition. Greengrocers, other people, farmers markets have helped, but actually the producers are out there producing food that is affordable, but just that by the time it gets to many, many people, it's not affordable. So we've got to change that.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more on that one. So we've got a question here from Steve Thomas, who's taking a slightly different direction with his question. So New Zealand has some very challenging greenhouse gas emission targets, including specific methane reduction. It is unlikely that the current mitigations will meet these. How do you see New Zealand meeting these targets by 2030 and 2050? Will we be seeing large land use change, and what support will government be giving to enable land use change? Which comes in, I guess, under the pivot and innovation piece there.
If I start the land use change, I think one of the things we have to do, and we had government extension services for many years, and that was kind of privatised. And there's a lot of good advice going out there, but often just the farmers who can afford to buy it. And so we need to ensure that all farmers have access to better knowledge. We want to complete our soils mapping. Climate change is offering new opportunities for land use on farms. You might have, as I said before, never thought it possible to grow hops in some of the areas that it is being grown, or other crops, or you know, have higher value land production. And we've seen massive land use change. Come back to the point, we just have to provide information for farmers to know what those options are. That's a good start. Then if you come back to, I wouldn't be so negative to say we can't mitigate or offset or bring in technology that will help us reduce. We will always have probably methane emissions from livestock production, but one of the projects that we've supported, and hasn't been a huge amount of money, it's gone to Cawthron, is to further investigate Asparagopsis, which is a red seaweed grown here in New Zealand in the sea, and they say, almost unbelievable, that up to 80% of methane emissions from livestock can be, we can have an 80% reduction by feeding Asparagopsis to these animals. Now, I don't know how it works, but they have got money now to go and further prove or disprove or commercialise those options. So even if it ends up being a half or a quarter of that, there are new and emerging technologies that enable us to reduce our emissions. And so with a number of those, and we're working in a global alliance with about 65 other countries, sharing all that knowledge in areas of rice production and livestock. We're focused on livestock in particular, and cereals, to try and say where we discover a technology or something that we can feed to reduce, that we'll share that knowledge as much as we can. So I think it's quite achievable, 10% by 2030, and then, you know, we'll leave it up to the Climate Change Commission. And they have to, considering the economic and social impacts of any change, they have to come up with a target that's achievable, given the emerging technologies. So, people who see this as a negative, should switch that around and say that if we're at the forefront of innovation in this area, and we can show that we're the best farmers for the world, doesn't mean to say we won't have emissions from our food production. Of course we will, but if we can reduce those as much as possible and share that knowledge with the world, that again gives us a huge advantage. And already, whether it be Europe or even other countries, Brazil claiming that it will be selling zero carbon beef. All these countries realise the benefits of moving in this direction, and we can do it better than anyone, I'm sure.
Absolutely, I think you're right there. I know that there was some research not long out of Lincoln University with this very topic in mind that was on One News, I think, a few weeks ago. So if you're not familiar with that one, have a look up. Professor Pablo Gregorini, who's the chief of the Centre of Excellence there, did some interesting research from one of his PhD students.
I think even an area of nitrous oxide and the emissions from that, we've seen with the use of plantain, and again, I know Lincoln's been doing some work, and they have up in Dairy NZ as well. 40%, 100% of pasture plantain. What are the effects of that on both animal health as well as production, and of course on emissions? So there's lots of great and exciting things happening around the country.
Exactly. We've got, now here's an interesting one here. We've got an anonymous question about the future for monocrop farms and whether or not there is still a future. And I see that we've had a response about a multi-crop energy demonstration farm that has been launched with MPI and Ag Research with Lincoln University. So this person is suggesting that multi-crop is the future. How do you feel about that? Are you in the same boat there?
Look, a long time ago, when I was at Lincoln in the 70s, we just called them mixed farm models. It was a bit more basic. And I grew up on one where we had sheep, we had bulls, we had dairy, and I guess it spread the risk. And people forget that we've always had ups and downs in the markets for all of our products that we've sold. We're trying to reduce those, but the reality is it will probably continue. So if you've got more than one source of income, then you probably spread your risk. And I think, as I say, with some better soils mapping, with knowledge of what is possible, and I guess different structures. Not everyone wants to have a big header and have a big cow shed, and run big yards for bulls. But maybe through different shared models of management, we can have good land use and more secure income. When something's up, the others, something else might be down. There are many farmers who in the past have farmed that way, but we've ended up going to specialisation, I guess, which is when you need huge costs of capital, you think, you've just got to justify that and scale up. And that has worked for efficiency, but not for resilience. And I guess if we're talking about resilience, then we have to look at spreading the risk.
Yeah, and I think that will be some interesting outcomes to come from that Lincoln University multi-cropping energy demonstration farm. That's quite a mouthful to put into one sentence. But I think with the research that will be going on there in the next couple of years, that'll be quite telling, I think. And especially, I think, and I might be wrong here, so someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the intention as well is to power the Lincoln University dairy farm from the energy that's harvested there. So I think it sort of takes a multifaceted approach there, which will be telling.
People will be fascinated with this research. I think getting it out to farmers. What has happened is a lot of that information is held within the universities with the CRIs. We've had private sector extension services, but for the farmers who don't or can't afford to or don't think they need to, some of that knowledge doesn't get out there, and it should do, because it just provides opportunities when people feel trapped because the milk price is down and they haven't got other options. there may be a bit more knowledge about alternatives. Might give them, they might have some clear light ahead of them and feel more positive about it.
How do you suggest that we make that information a bit more accessible going forward?
I think most of it should be open source. I very much believe that internationally now there's not much. There might be some IP around particular plants or some technologies that we want to capitalize on here. But what we've often seen with that IP is that often gets purchased by we might intend to keep it in New Zealand, but then someone decides to sell it off anyway, and it disappears to the US. So you might as well have open source and make sure we can all have access to it. And again, because we are the most adaptable, most innovative and flexible farmers in the world, we'll pick that up faster than anyone else. And I think utilize it. And the same goes for food processing. We're just going to have to remain ahead of the curve as a small country, quite a long way from some of our markets. We should be known as the place of innovation, the place of best new, innovative and safe food types. That's our future.
Maybe that's the new strap line for the New Zealand market. Who knows? Maybe you should have got a job in marketing.
Well, I tried in tourism, anyway.
So we've just got time for one more question here. So sorry to the questions that have remained unanswered, but I'm going to take the top one here from Anna Veal. So what are your thoughts on the current MFE findings, which examined the economic costs of reducing emissions across all sectors of the economy, and found that converting sheep and beef farmland to pine forest was significantly cheaper than nearly any other option for reducing New Zealand's climate pollution?
Look, it might be the best way to mitigate, but actually that's not the best one long term for our communities in the wider areas. So there's been a view that and the carbon markets is not something that I personally supported. I would have a carbon tax, which is what we're moving to effectively. We would reinvest back into new technology. It was always my preferred option. Farmers didn't want that. We've now got a market that gives indications on the carbon price, which then should change behaviour in the right direction. Now, there are people who are buying farms and converting them for carbon farming. I don't agree with that at all. There's no government incentive at all for that. We are only, the Billion Trees program is actually around forestry, indigenous and exotic forestry, but not for carbon farming. So we have to address that issue. We don't want to be a country of trees just so that other people can carry on, emitting carbon internationally and having their lifestyle while we are the mitigation option and offset option. So government is watching us very, very closely. The levels of actually afforestation are still relatively low compared to what was happening in the 1990s. So we've got a long way to go before we get anywhere near where the level of forestation was in the late 90s. So look, that's MFE's calculation. I don't follow all of theirs. We have healthy debate between MPI and MFE. And economists are about as accurate as politicians. We all have our views, and sometimes scientists as well. We've just got to be careful that we know why we do the science, how it will be applied, and what were the questions that were asked at the start of it. So again, I think being open and honest, and I think we have a reputation for that generally, is the best way forward. We have to work together on this, and that's where I guess places like Lincoln and Blink, having open conversations like this is really, really useful. I like to provoke debate. When we all agree it's boring, and the chances are we'll be wrong. But when we have really robust debate and we look at every aspect of a challenge, then it's most likely we'll come up with the right solution. And I think as Kiwis, we've been really good at that, and we just have to carry on.
No innovative idea ever came out of a salad is my common phrase around the office. So I think exactly right. We need to continue having these conversations. And this is when we know that A, you get empowered because you feel like you're part of the solution and invested your time in towards solving that. And I guess B as well, ensuring that you are part of the solution and that your innovative ideas have come to the forefront as well. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Minister. It's been A wonderful, wonderful event, and we would love to have you back again in whatever context that may be coming forward. But it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry that we couldn't answer everybody's questions. There were so many that came through. But just before we wrap up the afternoon's event, or this morning's event now, if you haven't heard already, which is why we're doing a big innovation piece here, B-Link Innovation with sponsorship from Farmers Weekly, Lincoln University and New Zealand Young Farmers have launched the inaugural Celebrating Success and Innovation Awards, where we're celebrating on-farm, off-farm and future tech innovations. So whether you're a farmer with a great idea, it sounded like there are a few in the comments today, to improve efficiency, or a producer with an idea to connect directly with the consumer, or indeed a secondary school student with a fantastic idea around future tech to improve output or efficiencies, we want to hear from you. So there's some incredible prizes up for grabs. There's a few that are about to be announced this week. We want to hear your amazing ideas. And I think that innovation is something to be incredibly celebrated. We've seen a lot of events around hacking the crisis, or breaking the rules of pandemic, but I think we really need to get down and dirty, get the innovations to the forefront, ensure that we're celebrating them and getting them to market if they are going to improve what we've got, or improve our market story as well. So, well, that's it from me. Again, a massive thank you to the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Communities, Biosecurity and Food Safety, the Honourable Damian O'Connor. Together with you, our participants, we're really looking forward to seeing you back in the B-Link workshop for the next event, part of our innovation series. And funny that we should mention it today, is the grass always greener? An intro to regen farming. I'm sure this event will be equally popular with 3 expert speakers, Sam Lang, Emily House and John O'Frew. You can get your ticket from our website or straight from Eventbrite. If you use this code just on the bottom, you'll get 50% off. If you're interested in keeping up to date with our future events, make sure to subscribe to our email communications on our website. Thank you again, Minister. It's been great having you, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
You're welcome. Look, thanks very much. And I just encourage everyone to go and have a look at that Fit for a Better Future, for the documents that we'll put out there, and to understand Te Taiao, and hopefully share my passion for it being the underlying values of what we do from here.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks again, Minister. Thank you, everyone, and we will catch you at the next event.
Thank you.